Well, Isaiah is a trove of quotable quotes, which many of you have heard. He's the most quoted prophet in the New Testament. He's the most quoted prophet in the Gospels. And all sorts of verses come to mind to encourage, to challenge. Verses like, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news, who proclaim peace, who proclaim salvation. Come, all of you who are thirsty, come to the waters, and you who have no money, come buy and eat. Another one, your iniquities have separated between you and your God. Your sins have hidden his face from you, and that's why he cannot hear you. And one which has been very personal to me, lift up the hands that hang down and strengthen the feeble knees. As you know, it was all planned that I was going to have an operation which gave me a new knee in about 10 days' time. But by mutual agreement with the surgeon, I put that off, and I'm trusting that the Lord will confirm my feeble knees. And we will wait and see what happens. And the knife may come, I don't know. But at the moment it's been put off. So I can walk around the St Helens Down and play my cornet for you to sing carols again this year. But as every preacher attempts to do, is to put things that we're talking about into a context, if possible into a historical context, or into a context which makes sense, makes better sense of the reading that we have before us. Isaiah I find to be the most annoying of prophets from this point of view, because he doesn't date his prophecies. There are two historical references in Isaiah which we can fix, and that's the 6th year of Uzziah, King Uzziah of Judah, and that was the date on which Isaiah was called as a prophet. And 3 kings later, in the reign of Hezekiah, when the invading army of the Assyrians was at the gates of Jerusalem, Isaiah prophesied that the Lord would see them off. And they actually went away and didn't take Jerusalem on that occasion. And so those two fixed points. But throughout the rest of the book, it's very difficult to know exactly when and what the circumstances are or were when he was saying the things that he said. He foretold, for instance, and watched the destruction of the northern kingdom of Israel by the Assyrians. He saw that it would be the result of the sinfulness of the people in that kingdom, and it came about in his lifetime. He foresaw the conquest of the Assyrian Empire by the Babylonians, and in his lifetime he witnessed that. But he also foresaw the fall of Jerusalem to the Babylonians. He foresaw the exile of the people of Jerusalem and Judea in Babylon. He foresaw the conquest of Babylon by Persia under Cyrus, and he foresaw the return of the exiles to Judea and Jerusalem. And those events took place well after his death, about a century or more after his death. We're going to take today's reading, today's passage, at its face value as applying to those exiles from Jerusalem and Judah who were in exile in Babylon. And the reading starts, if I can find it. That's why I can't find it, because I've put my notes in the wrong page. Listen to me, my people. Hear me, my nation. The law will go out from me. My justice will become a light to the nations. My righteousness draws near speedily. My salvation is on its way. And go to the end of our reading. The ransomed of the Lord will return. They will enter Zion with singing. Everlasting joy will crown their heads. Gladness and joy will overtake them, and sorrow and sighing will flee away. Can you imagine? You are in exile. You have seen either you were carried off into exile, or your parents were, or you were on your mum's back as you were sent off into exile from Jerusalem when Jerusalem was taken by the Babylonians. You are in exile. You are despised by the people that you are exiled amongst. You get the lowest possible jobs, the cleaners and all the other jobs which other people don't want to do. They're your jobs because you are a despised people among a foreign nation. This is your situation. Think of that poor Syrian boy last week in the news, bullied simply because he is an exile. He is someone who has come to this country from terror, and he is being bullied unjustifiably, totally, in his school. This was the position of the Jews in Jerusalem, Jerusalem and Judea in Babylon. Just imagine then what the prophet Isaiah is reading here, what he says is saying to you. It's a message of hope. It's a message of redemption. It's a message of return. So there you are, in deep trouble. And here he is giving you hope, keeping you alert and alive to the way in which God is going to bless you. Is this any relevance to us? Well, yes, it is, because very often we ourselves feel that we are in trouble. We have got trouble in our families, we have got trouble personally, perhaps in our jobs, we have got trouble certainly nationally. At the moment we're in a mess. We have reason not to be very hopeful about anything sometimes. Our hopes have been extinguished, our plans have been dashed, all that we hoped for is going up in smoke. And from time to time that is an experience, I believe, of all of us. And when that is the case, these words come very powerfully to us. And Isaiah picks up three elements of hope. Three things. And in verse 4, verse to verse 6, he says, "My righteousness draws near speedily. Lift up your eyes to the heavens, look to the earth beneath. The heavens will vanish like smoke, the earth will wear out like garments, and its inhabitants die like flies, but my salvation will last forever. My righteousness will never fail." Look at the heavens above you. Do they change? No, they don't change. They seem to go on forever. They've been there, probably evolving, the evidence suggests, for 13.5 billion years. And look at the earth around you. It seems pretty stable. And the evidence suggests again that it's been evolving for something like 4.5 billion years. And here's God saying, look at that, look at this, and I am more permanent than any of that. My righteousness will go on forever. My righteousness will never fail. My salvation will last forever. So the first thing he says is, look at God. If you're in trouble, look at God. Look at the permanence of God. The second thing he says is, do not fear, this is verse 7 and 8, do not fear the reproach of men or be terrified by their insults. Why? because they're temporary. For the moth will eat them up like a garment, and the worm will devour them like wool. All the things that we're concerned about, they're temporary. They're not going to be there all the time. Look up, be hopeful. And then finally he says in verse 9 through to 11, think of what God's done for you in the past. What does he say? In the generations of old, was it not you who cut Rahab to pieces? Which needs a little bit of explaining. Rahab was an image of Egypt. Rahab has three meanings in the Old Testament. This is one of them. This is one here. That it's a sort of imagery of a monster, a wicked monster that dwells down there south in Egypt. And this has always been the place where Israel thought wickedness dwelt. And God rescued them. He cut Rahab to pieces, pierced the monster through. Was it not you who dried up the sea, the waters of the great deep, made a road in the depths of the sea so that the redeemed might cross over? So he looks back at the Exodus, the great moment of salvation for the Jewish people. What do we look back on in our own lives, where God's salvation has spoken to us and meant everything to us? So he looks at these three things: the permanence of God and his very nature, the impermanence of all the issues and problems that we face, and the things that he has done in the past, and we see in history, and we see in our own lives. Those three things. Well, this is Advent, and I found it very difficult to fit this passage into Advent, to be honest. I puzzled about it all the for a lot of time. But if you read through this section of Isaiah from chapter 49 through to 53, what gradually develops in that passage, in those passages, is a picture of somebody who he calls the servant of Jehovah. The servant of Jehovah, who will bring salvation, who will bring justice to the nation. And as that passage moves, those passages move on to chapter 2, to chapter 52 and 53, we come to some very familiar words. At the end of chapter 53, see, my servant will act wisely. He will be raised and lifted up and highly exalted. Just as there were many who were appalled at him, his appearance was so disfigured beyond that of any man, and his form marred beyond human likeness, so will he sprinkle many nations. And when we go through to chapter 53, he, the servant of Jehovah, was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and familiar with suffering. Like one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he took up our infirmities and carried our sorrows. Yet we considered him stricken by God, smitten by him, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgression. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him, and by his wounds we are healed. Who's he talking about? Jesus. These are the very words which the New Testament directly refer to Jesus. As he died on a cross, he was the suffering servant of Jehovah prophesied in those days, long before, in the days of Isaiah, as he was led to write these words or speak these words. And we have to understand that Jesus himself saw himself clearly in this picture of the suffering servant of Isaiah, because when he preached his first sermon, the first recorded sermon, he quoted from chapter 61. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives and release from darkness for the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favour. And he rolled up the scroll, returned it to the synagogue leader, and sat down. And he said, it is recorded in Luke's Gospel, he said to everybody, "Today these words are fulfilled in your ears." So Jesus saw himself in these passages in Isaiah, and that is why we talk about them at Advent. Now, we've heard what Jesus saw his mission to be, and if it is his, it has to be ours as well. And although we might be waiting in Advent for Christmas to come, we have absolutely no excuse for waiting to do his will in the power of his Spirit, to work for his kingdom, to live out his justice, his righteousness, his compassion, his mercy, and his forgiveness in our daily lives. May the Lord give us grace to do just that.